I wonder what giants you are facing in your life just now. I wonder what it is that's in front of you that just seems massive and totally intimidating, that it just blocks your view. It's just a giant there. And maybe for some of us, it's something that was around pre-COVID, but lockdown and just kind of living in this strange reality of the last 12 months, we've kind of avoided it. But now we're coming out. We know there's something we're going to have to face. Or maybe it's the consequences of lockdown and COVID, that as we come out of lockdown, we know that we're going to need to face. Maybe it's around your finances or your health, or maybe there's a kind of relationship conflict. Maybe there's a kind of dream in front of you and there's an obstacle facing it. I wonder what it is that when I say what's the giant that's in front of you that's just totally intimidating, I wonder what it is that comes to mind. And how is it that we conquer the giants in our lives? What is it we can do to kind of take them out of the picture so that we can continue to progress, either as a church, a community, as a family, as an individual? Because that's what we're going to be thinking about today. We're going to be thinking about how we slay the giants in our life. And if that touches a nerve for you and you're watching this live and you'd love us to pray for you, I'm going to invite you right at the beginning to do something brave. I'm going to invite you into the chat to just give us a sense of what the giants might be that you're facing in your life. And people will pray for you as you listen for this message. You know, you won't just be listening to the message, but right now people will be praying. And you don't need to be that specific. You could just say your finances or a relationship or a dream or whatever it might be. You don't need to give any personal details, but give us a sense and I'll pray for you. And I know there's other people from our community that will pray for you right through the message. If you're facing a giant and you want us to pray, maybe just put that in a chat, because we're beginning a brand new series looking at the life of David, King David in the Old Testament. And we're going to do a different story from his life over the next few weeks. And David is just a massive character when it comes to the Old Testament. Apart from Jesus, David's name is mentioned more than anyone else in the whole of the Bible, more than Moses, more than Abraham. He's one of the most named people. David is the most significant king in the life of Israel. David is the most significant worship leader of prayer, not only in the Bible, but in the whole history of the world. I don't think anyone's influenced people's prayer life more than David. It's hard to emphasize how significant a person he is. In fact, when you get to the New Testament, the first verse in the New Testament is talking about Jesus, and it names Jesus as a son of David. And even as you get into the New Testament, David is increasingly significant as a person. And so we're going to be thinking about David and the life of David through this series. And as I've kind of previous months in preparation for the season, just been reading the life of David and just reflecting on it, I'm so excited for this season because my kind of impression of David, and my respect for him has gone through the roof as I've kind of read the stories and read of the sort of person he is. But he's a flawed character. He's not a perfect person. He's a normal human being, and he faces some of the challenges that me and you face. He faces family feuds. He makes mistakes, and he wrestles with decisions. He thinks about his dream and destiny. His character is tested. He explores what it means to be a person after God's own heart when all around your life is kind of falling apart. He has a calling on his life, and he wrestles with that and what that means and how he can make a difference. And there's just all sorts of things in his life that I think, even though it was written 3,000 years ago, it can still connect with me and you today. So stick around for this series. It's going to be really helpful, I think, really relevant, because you're going to connect with David, I think, in his stories and in his life, and it's going to teach us about what it means to be human, what it means to follow God. And we're going to dive straight in today into the most famous story of David, perhaps one of the most famous stories in the whole Bible, and it's going to help us in our own journey of how we slay the giants in our life. And often this story's relegated to Sunday school, and so adults don't tend to look at it, and I think that's a real shame, because this story is just jam-packed with wisdom and insights for us. In fact, I thought about doing a whole series just on this story. There's so much in it. So what I'm going to do today, we're going to go through the story, and I'm going to throw out some points and some lessons. There's going to be quite a lot to it. And I just want you to grab onto something that might help you face the giants in your own life. Don't worry about the bits that don't connect, but just look for that insight from David. And it comes from 1 Samuel chapter 17, which you may want to look at later on. And it starts, the story opens, and the people of God, the nation of Israel, is on one side of this valley, and the Philistine army is on the other side of the valley. And they're kind of standing off against each other, waiting for who to make the first move. And King Saul is leading the people of God, is leading the Israelite army. And then from the Philistine army, this giant of a man called Goliath comes out. He calls himself the champion of Philistine, the champion of their army. And he makes a challenge to the Israelite army. And in a sense, this is a good deal, because he essentially says, why don't the best of the Philistines fight the best of the Israelites? And whoever wins, that army wins. And it saves massive bloodshed, it saves massive risks. If you win, it means you get a lot of plunder from the other army. And if you lose, at least you have loads of lives. And so Goliath comes out, and he's this mountain of a man. He's just massive, and it tries detail. The Bible describes his armor and his spear and his sword, and how strong it is and how heavy. I mean, me and you couldn't even lift his spear. It's so that massive. And he comes out and he offers a challenge to who from the Israelites wants to come and fight him. And nobody does, because they see the size of him and they're just terrified. And day after day, the Goliath comes out and he challenges the people of God. And day after day, the Israelite army, it says, are just terrified. And they're terrified for two reasons. The first reason they're terrified is because Goliath is massive, and it probably means the Philistines might win the fight. But here's the important thing. They're terrified for a second reason, and a more important reason. The second reason they're terrified is because their king, their champion, the tallest and strongest of their army who became king, King Saul, when they need him, is hiding in his tent. And he's refusing to come out to battle with Goliath. They're terrified because Goliath is in front of them, but they're even more terrified because the one they're relying on is hiding in a tent. And there's a backstory here where the people of God wanted a king because they thought a king would rescue them, that would keep them safe. And they're at this point when who or what you depend on, who or what you lean into and trust in, when that disappoints you, when that lets you down, life becomes terrifying, doesn't it? When who you're leaning on, who you're trusting in, when who or what that is lets you down, life becomes terrifying. And they're in that place where their king Saul that they've lent into, they've trusted in, they thought he's the one who kept them safe. He's letting them down at this point. He's hiding in a tent. And that makes them feel very vulnerable and very, very unsafe. Now, this has gone on for like 40 days, every day, Goliath coming out and Saul hiding in his tent, and the people of God being terrified. Terrified because of Goliath, but terrified because the one they put the trust in had let them down and disappointed them. And then David turns up. David is probably 15. He's a teenager at this point. He's the youngest. And he stayed at home looking after the sheep, and his dad has sent him to the battlefield to see his three older brothers and to bring them food and supplies. And so he turns up on one of the days when Goliath is parading around and they're all terrified, and he brings food, and he starts asking questions. He starts asking questions of what's going on and who this guy is and why people are not fighting him. And he's saying, well, what reward do you get if you fight him? And he's saying, who is this guy anyway? Who's he to defy the army of the living God, he says? Who's he? Yeah, okay, he looks big, but who's he to come against God and the people of God? And he gets into trouble because he's wandering around asking questions. Now, I'm not saying this is true in my house, but if you know any teenagers, and if you've known any teenagers, they can be a bit annoying, can't they? They can be annoying because they see the world in black and white sometimes. It's just very simple, and sometimes they challenge things by their straightforward and direct questions. And that can be really troubling for those of us who are older, who are longer in the tooth, and we've got lots of experience, and we just think it's a bit more complicated than that. It's not just simple. You just can't go and do that. But sometimes the clarity of the teenage mind, or the clarity of someone who's fresh into a situation, who just names it as it is, who just asks the question, well, who is this guy to defy the armies of the living God? Sometimes that's what's needed. That's why it's often good to get fresh people into positions of leadership and responsibility, and to listen to other voices beyond those who've been around a long time, because sometimes you just get a really clear perspective. And David gets into trouble because he's annoying everyone. He's asking these questions, and his brothers fall out with him and insult him because they're irritated by him, and eventually his questions reach Saul, the king. And so Saul invites him over to see him. All right, he'd already interacted with David in the past. David had been a musician for him. And David arrives in, and they have this conversation. And David, this 15-year-old shepherd boy, never experienced the army, the youngest, who's not even old enough to fight. He looks King Saul, who the people of Israel were depending on. He looks him in the eye, and he says this to him. He says, "Don't worry, I'll fight him. Don't worry, I'll fight him." And for some desperate reason, King Saul's out of options, and he kind of accepts it. But it's really interesting to read David's argument for why he, a shepherd boy with no history of battle, should fight and take on Goliath. And he recounts his experience as a shepherd boy. He recounts defeating lions and defeating bears. And David says, listen, I'll kill them, and therefore I will kill Goliath. And he kind of implies he's got a bit of a skill, because he's took out bears, he's took out lions, so he's quite able to do it, and he can take out Goliath, the Philistine. And then just at the end of his kind of argument in 1 Samuel 17 to Saul, he said this. He says that God's helped me defeat the lion and the bear, therefore God will help me defeat Goliath. Don't miss that really, really important point. God's helped me defeat the bear and the lion, therefore God's going to help me beat Goliath. You know, how do you become a giant killer? How do you conquer what's in front of you that seems massive and intimidating? How could David look Saul in the eye and say, I'll go and fight him? How could he have that faith and confidence and bravery? Because he looked at his past victories, and that gave him faith of what God could do in his future. He looked at his past victory, so he thought, well, hang on, in the past, I've defeated bears and I've defeated lions, and God has helped me do that, therefore God will help me win this next battle. God will help me face this giant. He drew faith from his past battles. He didn't look at his past battles and say, wow, I'm an amazing warrior. He looked at his past battles and said, God's an amazing God. And you find, as you follow this story, you'll see that David has this mindset all the way through. And it's simply this, that when a man or woman trusts God, then they're not afraid of what they should be afraid of. When a man or woman trusts God, they're not afraid of what they should be afraid of. And you find that when David writes his prayers in the Psalms, we get like the inside of this outside story, you know, getting what's going on inside David. And quite often in his Psalms, he'll have this phrase, he'll say, in you, O Lord, I place my trust. It's in the beginning of Psalm 25, I trust in you. And he looks at his past victories of beating the bear and beating the lion, and that doesn't give him confidence in himself, that gives him confidence in God, so that he can look King Saul in the eye, and he says, I'll go and fight Goliath, who's twice as big as me, who's a more experienced and warrior than me. But I'm not scared of what I should be scared of because of who I'm placing my trust in. 15-year-old teenager, what incredible faith that he has. But then what happens next is kind of the other side of the truth, really, that we need to understand if we're going to be killing the giants that are in our life. So if you're facing a giant just at the moment that's in front of you, that's massive and that's intimidating, I can encourage you just to take a leaf out of David's book and to just spend a little bit of time after this service, maybe get some quiet, maybe go for a walk, and just think about the past victories in your life that God's delivered you for. And think about the bears and the lions, the equivalents in your life that God's defeated through you. And draw strength and confidence for that for the giant that's in front of you. That's the first way I think that we beat giants. And the second thing is this, because what happens next is, for whatever reason, probably desperation rather than faith, Saul accepts David's offer of being the one to represent Israel in fighting Goliath. And Saul, who wants to be really helpful, does a most honourable thing, and he gives David the king's armour. Now this is massive for the king, which is the best armour, the most impressive, is given to this shepherd boy. I mean, that's an incredible honour for Saul to do that. And David willingly puts them on, but David's shorter, they don't fit, he can hardly move in them. You know, it's kind of a comic scene for a moment. I mean, you can imagine this little kind of teenager with this heavy armour that doesn't fit him, that's too big. You imagine the helmet kind of falling over the place and he can hardly move. And eventually David, who's been given this great honour of the king's armour, plucks up the courage and he says to the king, he says, I can't wear it. You know, I'm really honoured, thank you for this, but I can't wear it because I'm not used to it. And this moment, you know, there'll be people watching this. If you can grasp this moment, and if you can get the confidence that David had in this moment, you could be set free from something that's plagued you for decades. Because essentially David says, this doesn't fit me. This is meant for you, but it doesn't fit me. And then he picks up his stones and his shepherd's staff and his sling, and he goes off to fight Goliath. So many of us end up trying to put on somebody else's armour that's really impressive. It's somebody else's, but it doesn't fit us. It's just not us. And some of us, it's about the expectations for other people. Some of us involved in careers and ministries and the things we're doing that doesn't fit us. And it's because they're from other people. It's other people's expectations. Maybe a church leader, or maybe a parent, maybe a past mentor, your husband, your wife. There's other people who've got expectations of you that don't fit. Or sometimes there's roles and there's gifts that God's given us, but we downplay them. You know, one of the great shames I find in the church and in the world, actually, is that we elevate some skills more than others. That we see some things as more impressive than others. You know, if you're on a stage or if you're in front of people, if you're kind of leading, you're in the public eye, we give that much more honour than a lot of other roles that are really, really essential. And Paul in the early church in Corinthians, he writes about this and he says there's loads of gifts and they're all needed. You know, he talks about the church as a body and every part needing to do its bit. You know, one's not more important than the other, because if you take one out, then the body suffers. It can't operate. And some of us are given gifts that are, and abilities that are seen less in the world's eyes and even in the church's eyes. And that causes us to feel less than other people because we're living on the expectations of other people. Listen. All gifts and abilities are needed. And however God shaped you, have the confidence to lean into that and wear your own armour. Don't be put off by other people's. Whatever abilities God's given you, they're not less than anybody else's. You will look at other people and be impressed and think, wow, that's amazing. All right, but actually, if you do what God's called you to do, whatever God's placed inside you, if you fulfill that, it doesn't matter what the world says. It doesn't matter what people say. Actually, it's what God's called you to do, and it's just as important as everybody else. And David looks at Saul and he says, I can't wear this. I'm not used to this. This is not me. All right. This is not me. And my prayer is you'll have confidence to say, this is not me, that you'll step into the sling and the stones that is you, and you won't be having the expectations and pressures of other people. Because the giants fall faster when you play to your strengths. When you play to your abilities and the things God's called you to do, the giants fall faster. You know, as a church, we're able to conquer more in the name of Jesus when each of us plays to our strength, when each of us plays to our role. And sometimes that takes a bit of confidence. All right, a bit of confidence to step into it and own it and say, well, this is my calling, this is my role, and I'm going to fulfill it no matter what other people may think and say. And that's kind of what David did in that moment. He says, no, this is not me. And he stepped into his own expectations of what God has called him to, the gifts God had called him to. And with that staff, and with his stones, and with that sling, he walked out to battle to face God, confident and trusting that God would deliver him, because he'd seen the past victories of what God had did. And he knew the way God shaped him. He knew the abilities God had given him. And that's what he was going to lean into as he went out to the battle. But I know that it's not easy. It's not easy just to refuse other people's expectations and pressures, the armor that they want to put on you. I know as a leader of a church, God's given me certain abilities, to lead in a certain way. But I can come under pressure from people, from little comments that I'm not like this leader or I don't have that gift. And it's really difficult when you can compare yourself to other people or think, well, I don't have that and I'm not quite like that. Cause you to doubt yourself, doubt the things that God has given you, even people who are well-meaning. It takes a lot of faith in God, I think, because that's what it's about. It's not about being self-focused. It's about focusing on the stuff that God has put in me and allowing that to flourish and think, well, this is the way that God's made me. My only responsibility is to put on the armor that God has given me and to lead and to live and to serve in that way. And that's true for me, and it's true for you as well. And so David heads off into this battle, and he's all alone as he walks to Goliath. And it's hard to emphasize, isn't it, how dramatic this scene is. You've got the Philistines whose confidence is gone through the roof because there's man mountain Goliath against shepherd boy David. But imagine you're one of the people of Israel and your trust was in the king. The king who's the tallest and the strongest warriors. And instead the king sends out this little shepherd boy, and your life and future is in his hands. I can't imagine many Israelites with confidence in that moment. And David walks out with the hopes of the nation on his shoulders. And he walks out and he makes these statements, these incredible statements of faith and boldness. And it's important to hear how exactly he says it, because it tells us his mindset, and it tells us how we can conquer the giants in our lives that are so intimidating and big in front of us. And as he walks out, he shouts across to Goliath, this man mountain, and he said, listen, you come to me with a sword and with a spear. I mean, these are massive swords, massive spears, terrifying. He said, you come to me with all your big bronze armor, that's covering him from head to toe almost. And David says, I come to you not with a sling, not with a staff, not with 5 stones, not with a ranged weapon, not with something I've been practiced on. He says, I come to you in the name of the Lord. I come to you in the name of the Lord, and the one who's going to win this battle is God Yahweh. All right, my God's going to win this battle, and you're going to see it's your sword against my God. And what's really important to get our heads around here is David knows the way God shaped him, and he puts on his own armor in a sense, and he leans into his own skills and abilities, but he doesn't trust in those for victory. And that's a really important difference, because I find that when you've got gifts and abilities and the way God shaped you, you can either deny that and lack confidence and think, oh no, I'm not very good at that. I don't think I should do that. And so therefore we don't step forward to roles. We don't step into our destiny. Not because of lack of confidence in ourselves. It's actually a lack of confidence in what God has put in us. And sometimes you get that. But there's an equal danger where we start to get good at things. We're good at presenting, we're good at leading, we're good at organising, we're good at caring people. And we see that we've done well in the past and we get good feedback. And our confidence can start to be placed in those things. And we can think, you know what? I could take on Goliath. I could conquer this battle. I've got a lot of experience and I've got a lot of skills. I've done a lot of things in the back and I can see what's in front of me. And I believe I can conquer that. And that's a second mistake, because your skills and your abilities and your experiences, they're not yours. They're a gift from God. And David's got his mind really clear, because he walks into this battle and his confidence is not in his abilities. His confidence is in God, who's given those abilities. And it's a subtle difference, but it's worth thinking about. As you face the giants in your life, are you confident because of your abilities, because of your past? Is that where you're placing your trust? Or are you struggling with confidence because you don't believe in your abilities, which is equally lack of faith in God? Well, for David, he walks in and it's almost like he wants everyone to know. He says, I'm going to win this battle. And when I win this battle, I want you to know that it's God who's given me the victory. And sure enough, you probably know the story. He gets the stone, he gets the sling, and with perfect aim, he hits Goliath and kills him dead. And the Israelites win the victory. Suddenly their faith rises up. They rout the Philistines. David becomes instantly famous. He becomes a hero. But everything in this story is kind of about the mindset that David has that's going to follow him. He'll become a king. He'll become a king and he'll reign for 40 years and he'll be Israel's most famous king. He'll be the most famous Old Testament character, the one mentioned more than any other. He's the one who shaped our worship and prayer. But everything about him that we need to learn, we can learn from this story in this chapter. That his trust is in God. Psalm 25 verse 1. In you I place my trust. He looks at the past victories that God's given him, and that gives him confidence that God will give him future victories. He knows the way God shaped him, the skills and abilities he's given him, and it's that he's going to lean into to win victories. But when he goes into victories, he's facing that which should make him afraid. Because of his confidence in God, he's not afraid, and he's trusting God for victory, and he walks in obedience, and he walks in trust. And that's how you defeat giants in your life. You look at past victories. You walk into how God shaped you, the abilities and skills that he's got. But as you do that, your trust is in God because the battle belongs to him. If you're going to get victory, it's not because of your skills and abilities. It's because God's the one who's going to give you victory. My prayer for you, me is that we may learn from David, and not just this one, but in coming weeks. We may learn how to be a man or woman after God's own heart. And in coming months, may you defeat the giants with God's help in your life as well.
Thank you, Derek, for bringing that message to us. And if you'd like to chat about anything that's come out of the service or just connect with us as a church community, please contact us at hopechurchoswestry.org.uk/connect. And we'd love to have a chat with you. We'd love to hear from you. And if you'd like to get involved in some of our midweek activities that we do, we have a prayer meeting that happens at 8 p.m. every Wednesday. And also we have small groups that happen throughout the week. And we have activities that go on with our children, youth, and also our seniors. So please, again, if you'd like to be interested in any of our midweek activities, contact us at hopechurchoswestry.org.uk/connect. Also, thank you to everybody that supports us financially, whether that's regular giving or a one-off gift. It's great to have your support. And here is a short video from an organisation called Open Doors. And this is one charity that we work with as a church and support them financially. So it will show you a place where some of your money goes to help out.
Open Doors is an international Christian organization that serves persecuted Christians and churches in over 60 countries around the world. I'd like to take a few moments to thank you, Hope Church Oswestry, for your incredible ongoing support for our work and ministry, which now stretches back over many years, and to thank you for your generous gift of £600, which you recently gave, which has gone toward helping and supporting our persecuted brothers and sisters around the world who are most in need. In January, our World Watch List report came out. This report, published annually, highlights the 50 countries around the world in which it's most dangerous to be a Christian. And we're finding that the numbers of Christians that are being persecuted has risen. COVID-19 is one of the reasons for this, in which in so many countries we're finding out that Christians are being denied food at distribution centres, are being denied official government aid. In West Africa, we're seeing increased physical attacks against Christians. And in China, we're seeing increased state control over the church. But despite all these developments, we're also seeing wonderful stories of hope and encouragement. I know last year that you supported our Syrian Centers of Hope project. And in northern Syria, there was a lady called Nisreen, a Muslim lady, who visited one of our Centers of Hope in order to get some food as she was experiencing financial difficulty. While she was waiting, she asked one of our Christian volunteers for a cup of water. And he asked her if she wasn't fasting because she was a Muslim and it was Ramadan. And she said, "No, I believe in God. I believe he's with me all the time, but not in the way that Islam teaches." So this led to our volunteer talking to her about Jesus for an hour and a half. And in the end, Nisreen said, "Did Jesus come for me?" And he said, "Jesus came for everybody." And so she accepted Jesus into her heart. She came for a parcel of food, and she left with the parcel of food and with Jesus. What a wonderful story that is. And there's stories like that throughout the world at the moment, some of which we can tell, others which we we can't tell because of security reasons. Once again, Hope Church Oswestry, just want to thank you for your ongoing support and for standing with our persecuted brothers and sisters at this time. God bless you.
To give to us financially, you can either text us at 785 with HCO10 for £10 or HCO20 for £20, or visit us at hopechurchoswestry.org.uk/give. Thank you for joining us in our service today. Before we end our time together, I just want to pray. I want to pray for us as we enter this week coming. Let's pray. Dear Father, I just want to thank you. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you for your goodness towards us. Thank you that you are a God who delights in us and knows us so well. And Father, I do pray for each of us in this coming week that we will remember you with us. We'll remember the good things that you do for us. And as we walk through this week, that your presence will be with us, be close to us, take away any anxieties we have, lift any joys and delight we are feeling. Father, I just pray that over each of us this week. In your precious name I ask this. Amen. So again, thank you for being with us in our service. And let's just end our time together with another song from our music group. If you're watching this live, please join us for our Zoom meeting at 12 noon. It's just a time when we meet with each other, we can catch up and have a chat, and we'd love to see you there. The details of that meeting are on the screen.